Welcome to Public Speaking with Peter George. Do you want to be calm, confident, and credible every time you speak in public? Then stay tuned as Peter and his guests discuss public speaking tips, techniques, and tactics that help you increase your impact, influence, and income. Here's your host, Peter George.
How good would it be if you could add a tool to your speaker toolbox that would help you add more value to your clients? And at the same time, it would equip you with the ability to be more comfortable when dealing with unexpected situations. And it would help you turn negative self-talk into positive action and even more focused listening skills, which is extremely valuable in speaking. Today's guest, Izzy Gesell, is going to tell you more about this powerful tool and how you can use it to be a more connected, engaged speaker. Izzy is an organizational alchemist who helps individuals and organizations transform their thinking from commonplace to extraordinary. Through his keynotes, trainings, coaching, and facilitated sessions, Izzy offers imaginative, intuitive, and immediately useful insights and programs. Izzy was one of the first to use improv theater concepts as tools for personal and organizational learning, and is the author of Playing Along, Group Learning Activities Borrowed from Improvisation Theater. As a speaker, Izzy has earned the Certified Speaking Professional designation from the National Speakers Association. Here's my conversation with Izzy Gesell. Hi, Izzy. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's great to be here. I'm looking forward to it.
Izzy, many of our listeners may be familiar with improv through seeing live shows or television shows such as Whose Line Is It Anyway? Even so, can you explain what applied improv is?
Applied improv is a newly minted term that people who use improv theater activities for learning about real life situations, that's what the idea of applied improv is. Essentially, it's the application of improv theater principles to real life situations. What most people don't know is that improvisers, they look different than so many other people. They seem to be quicker, more creative, less fearful. And a lot of folks, myself included, many years ago, thought, I can't do that. First of all, I don't want to make a mistake. I don't want to look foolish. They're better than I don't think that fast. Turns out that really what you're seeing when you watch improv theater, improv comedy, is a result of quite a bit of structured practice. Like any skill, the more you practice, the more efficient, effective you are. And what the practice does, so improvisers practice not so much to predict names and results, but to practice being spontaneous, practice taking risks, practice working together. And the result is what we see when we go there. In the theater, the comedy part is the end result. In the applied improv world, it's the application of the principles, staying in the moment, dealing with what you get rather than what you wish for, trusting a process, suspending judgment, working together to co-create an outcome for a problem where you don't know what the result would be when you end up where you didn't even expect, having made some mistakes along the way. And that's all innovative thinking. And that's the training. So that's what applied improv does. And that's what my work is these days.
Some of my listeners might be thinking that they need to be funny or extremely outgoing, extroverted. Do they need special skills or can anybody do this?
Anybody can do this. And I am an introvert. Actually, I'm an ambivert, a term I learned from Daniel Pink, that it's not a binary thing. People aren't either introverts or extroverts. Many of us in different situations can toggle back and forth. I think what people are afraid of is that if I'm not funny, then I won't be successful or I won't be a good participant. In improv, the funny is the result of the reactions and the situations, not necessarily the goal. If you try to be funny, very often you will miss the mark because not everybody will get it, or it wasn't set up right, or it's just not appropriate. So the humor, the laughter in improv theater and improv comedy comes from watching the outcome of the situation. Most humor in general is about the reality of things and the element of surprise. A laugh is the body's recognition that you see things from a different point of view. Oh, now I get it. Now I see. Those are all things about the shifting in perspective, which is where the laughter comes from. It's your body's recognition that there's a different outcome than what you expected. So I would say to the folks you were talking about, it's not about being funny and that anyone can do it. And it really is a matter of taking a bit of a risk. I used to call my programs a ropes course for your mind. So if you can take that analogy, and if you're zip lining, if you're going out on a trek, a hike, a mountain climbing, or even a walk around the block sometimes to a new place, it's trying something new where you really can't fail because you can always learn something.
Now, what are the benefits, whether you're speaking, let's say a keynote speaker, or even facilitating in a breakout? What are the benefits of the improv principles?
A key benefit is that it gives you, the professional, something that most clients are looking for these days in their meetings, and that's engagement. Improv is very engaging, and it's engaging for people who aren't necessarily up there playing with you. Again, I ask the people listening, think about when you're watching improv, whether it's on TV, whether it's in person, you're playing along. You're in your mind, you're projecting what you would say if you were there from the safety of your seat. The beauty is that that's what happens when you're a speaker or a facilitator. So I can have one person up in front making a demo of a game. And I think, we could play a game, Peter, that might illustrate this at some point. But everybody in the audience is playing along with the person on stage with me. And I've done this for 2 people, and I've done this for 1,000 people. And for the large groups, I'm a keynote speaker. And what I'm able to do is bring these engaging activities into large rooms as well as small rooms. And the way to do that is I will demo a game. I'll ask for a volunteer. Somebody eventually will come up, even though a lot of people don't want to come up. I'll demonstrate the game with the volunteer. People will watch it. And then I'll ask everybody in the room, pick a partner and play the same game. So you can have, again, 2, you can have 1,000. They're in twos. And the energy that is created through those interactions is magic. And then the facilitation part comes from asking questions. Either rhetorical questions, because you can't have 1,000 people raising their hand, or questions to the person next to you. What was that like? How did you feel when you saw that this person came up and volunteered? Generally, the answer to that question is relief. How did you feel when you saw it? Oh, great. We were grateful to him. So I have that opportunity then when the audience recognizes that they felt better when the volunteer came up. I have the opportunity to say, this is a leadership action. What do I mean by that? Well, leadership is not so much about what you do as how what you do makes people feel. This person volunteering raised their status in your eyes, speaking to the audience, because of what they did. And this is one way, this example is how you can use an improv game to, let's say you're speaking on leadership. You just made a leadership point without having to do anything other than play and ask the question.
I love that idea. And it's funny, I had to laugh because that's exactly how I would feel if you said, how did you feel that Bob got up and went to the front of the room?
Yeah.
He just became my best friend.
Who do we trust? We trust people who we feel safe around. We trust people who somehow, and think about the concept of leaders that you would like to follow. How do you become the person that other people want to be around? Consciously or consciously, they feel better when you're there. It may be when you walk into the room, yeah. Again, that may not be conscious. It may be a feeling of, I trust this person. I'm glad they're here. I'm glad they're the leader. The other side of that is, and there are improv games that's called World's Worst. You say, okay, what's the world's worst leader? And then people will give you some adjectives. And then you can say, well, what the opposite of that would be the best leader. But you're exactly right, Peter. The secret to using improv games for speaking, for group work, for facilitating, is that whoever is watching is mentally and emotionally involved in what's going on so they can participate in the debrief, the follow-up after the questions about what'd you do, what'd you think, how'd you feel, and does this help you or hinder you, and what might you do differently? There's the course.
People listening might be thinking, I absolutely love this idea, but what do I do if the activities I use in my program just don't work the way I thought they would?
Yeah, well, the first question is don't assume anything. Because they're going to zigzag. The metaphor I use is think of this experience as if you were a GPS, and GPS is a very comfortable rerouting. They say go left, you go right. The GPS does not go, well, I told you to go left. Why aren't you going left? You're going to get lost. Oh my goodness, I'm a bad GPS. No, it goes rerouting. And what the rerouting is, and this is one of the trainings that comes out from the practice of these activities, these games, whatever you want to call them, is that you are expecting that things may not go as well as you think, or may not go like you think. And it teaches you to let go of being in the future, projecting onto the outcome and trusting the process. And in this way, it's very much a life skill. COVID has taught us nothing if not that we have to trust the process. What process is our choices? But making plans, remember last year, the new normal, when this is over, things will go back. Things don't go back, my friends. Things don't go back. They don't even go straight. They zigzag. What I would say to the person, another advantage as a speaker or facilitator is that when you present an activity that you are as uncertain about as the audience, you are exposing your vulnerability and your trust in the process. So you are exemplifying exactly what you want them to go through. I'm not saying here, I'm not up here as a speaker, I know the outcome, I have this game, and I'm going to tell you what the result is. I'm here, I'm offering you this activity, and it's certainly helped me in my career being able to be in front of many, many people, and things did not happen the way I expected, or sometimes people couldn't manage it at all. And I had to show my vulnerability. And time again, when I made mistakes or things threw me off balance and I admitted it, the client and the audience raised their respect for me. And that was one of the biggest learnings I had early on, that if I'm perfect, they're not that interested in listening to me because they don't see themselves. If I'm imperfect, if I'm human, if I'm like them, more interest. That was a big one for me.
I always take that as one, just like you said, they realize that you're not perfect. You're more like them. And a lot of times it's like, well, thank God that happened to him and not me.
Exactly. I think it was Mel Brooks a long time ago said the difference between comedy and tragedy is comedy is when you fall down a manhole. Tragedy is if I cut my finger. So if it happens to you, I could laugh, but you're absolutely right. And that empathy part, we talk a lot about putting yourself in someone else's shoes or positions. Empathy is another really strong feeling that comes through here because everybody sitting there on some level has similar feelings. Taking a risk, being vulnerable, making a mistake, saying something without thinking, meaning maybe I'll get myself in trouble. Maybe my true feelings will come out. And do I want the people in the audience to know my true feelings? Do I want my boss to know my true feelings? So I'm just going to shut down a little bit. Because these games have no real world consequences, and people understand that very quickly, people are willing to take risks around these games that they're not willing to take risks about in other areas of their lives. However, those activities create real feelings. So we can say, why didn't you take a risk? Why didn't you volunteer? I didn't want to look foolish. I didn't want to make a mistake. I didn't think I was good enough. Well, what can we take away from this activity, which has no real world consequences, and take it into this problem solving meeting we're having in an hour, where we need to come up with a really difficult solution to a very intractable problem? And you go, oh, okay. So if people are afraid to take a risk, afraid to be vulnerable, don't believe they're as good as everyone else, you're not going to get the benefit of their wisdom or insight. So you can train them is not exactly the right word, they can experience what it's like to have those feelings. Everyone else is empathizing because they put themselves in that position. And then when you go into the real world meeting, people are willing to take a risk, and nobody necessarily will jump on the blame game. Nobody will put them down. It's very much a yes and versus a yes but approach.
Now, when you talk about these activities you're having people doing and that you as a keynote speaker or a facilitator, we have to incorporate things that are relevant to our audience.
Yeah.
How do our listeners know what activities they'd have would be relevant to either their topic or the objectives of their particular audiences?
A couple of things that I would suggest. One is that you have to consider this in your program design. In my coaching for keynote speakers and facilitators, I think one of the things that is not given the credence and credit and effort that could be done is program design. So the idea is that you're hired for a reason. There are certain objectives. What are those objectives? And how is your presentation? Let's say it's a keynote. How is that going to look? What's the storyboard of it? What's your start? What's your end? What are the main points you have? What's the action step that you want people to take? And again, the key for keynotes is very few main points, 3 points. Have something clear about what you're saying, and you open and you close. And I would say for each of the 3 points, you have an activity. And that activity leads to questions that highlight, again, they can be rhetorical or they can be interactive. These questions highlight the point you made. And then after 3 of them, and you wrap it up, you say, okay, here's game 1. You can focus on, let's say, staying present. My 3 main pieces for my keynote about improv, the applied improv, is improvisers are able to stay in the moment. Past is gone, the future is unknown. Improvisers deal with what they got rather than what they wish they had. And that is yes and versus yes but. I'm dealing with reality. And improvisers trust process, suspending judgment about whether things will work out or not in the middle of it. So I have those 3 points. In each of those points, I will either have a story or an activity. I will mention the points. I will ask, how is that for you? And I will say, and that's it. And here's the relevance to improv. And here's the relevance to you, the audience. And then you close. Long way of saying it's in the design. The activities and the questions are preloaded, so to speak.
Speaking of using the activities, do you use them when you coach other speakers?
Yes, I do. I use them because, again, you can have a 2-person activity that will also be able to be expandable to an audience size activity. And the coaching with the speaker is a way of, literally, it's practice. It's very similar, let's say, to tennis, where your coach is giving you activity, hitting the ball to you and telling you, do this, do that, do it this way, practice this way. And then going, well, what was that like? And what were you thinking about that shot? And what might you do differently? So this is exactly the reason, I'm glad you asked this question, why eventually the speaker will become comfortable not knowing the outcome because they trust the process because they've gone through it. They've already gone through it. In fact, if we have time, I could play a fast game with you that might illustrate that now or
Sure.
So the game that I'm thinking of is called One Word at a Time Story. If you watch Whose Line Is It Anyway, it's a very common game. You and I are going to tell a story that's never been told before.
Okay.
And we're going to do this one word at a time. All right. So I would pause right now and say, what's going through your mind right now?
Nervousness.
What are you nervous about?
Like most people, not looking like a fool.
Okay. A fast example of I suggested what we're going to do, and then I stopped and I noticed a reaction, even if, without seeing you, the silence is a reaction. And then the question simply is, what are you thinking? What are you feeling?
I like that.
And all I did was tell you that we're going to play a game. And we've spent so far a bunch of minutes where I've said over and over again, no real world consequences, cannot fail. It's just for fun. But the reaction is real.
Right.
So this is a micro example of how powerful and useful this is. And I would say that to the listeners, check in and see if you had a reaction when I told them, I'm glad I'm not there, or maybe I'd like to see what he does, or whatever it may be. But your self-talk is on 24/7 streaming.
Yeah, right.
And what the applied improv approach does is allow you to monitor your self-talk in an objective way to see how your thinking drives your behavior. Simple as that. So we'll do this for a minute or less. The idea is that we're going to tell a story that's never been told before. I found it helpful to use the words period, question mark, exclamation point. Either of us could do that whenever we think there's a sentence that's finished, because that helps round out the story. However, that can't be our turn. So I can't, when it's my turn, always go, period, back to you. I can't abdicate. And I know some people think about that. Okay, I'll just say period. So I usually ask for a title of a story that's never been told before. Let me make it up. The Desk Lamp. That's the story. Do you want to go first, or do you want me to go first?
You go first.
Once
There
was
a
lamp
on
my
desk
that
would
always
go
boom.
when
I
turned
it
on.
period. One
Time
it
didn't
go.
boom.
So
I
threw
it
out. Period, exclamation point, the end. Let's just end there. Well, let me ask you, what was that like for you?
actually very easy.
Well,
And it was fun.
say more. What made it easy, and what's your reaction to compared to your feelings when I announced it?
It's funny when I reacted the way I did when you announced it, and I was truthful, like, oh, what if I screw this up? That reaction took me by surprise, because I get up in front of hundreds and sometimes thousands of people, and I'm perfectly fine. But as soon as you asked me to do something that I haven't done before, my reaction was, oh my God, what if? However, once we started the process, the moment you said desk lamp, I just looked at my desk, and I don't have a desk lamp, but I imagined one. And as soon as we did that, it was like, oh, this is simple. We're just going to go back and forth, and who cares? What lamp goes boom? It was perfectly fine and truthfully very, very easy.
Yeah. So thank you for that vision of the process. You encapsulate very much the entire process, where the self-talk either helps us or hinders us. You take the risk, you step in, whatever the metaphors are. Every long journey begins with one step, whatever it may be. The thing about improvisers, when you watch them, you're thinking they're so brave, but really the only thing they're doing that you may not do is stepping up, because there's a trust. And you described it. Once you felt comfortable enough to jump in the water, you didn't even ask yourself, can I swim? You assumed you could swim.
Right.
The other thing is that you agreed, and I felt that we got into a sync. I was hoping that you would say that word, and you did, and then it came back. So you notice how quickly it's possible to get in touch with people by listening to each other and letting go of what words I think should come, and just listening to the words that actually came.
When you just said being in sync, I felt the same thing. It seemed very simple and actually fairly easy once we were into it.
It is fairly easy. Once you're in it, it's easy, because you've made a commitment to play by the suggestion. And one of the things about improv is that because people say, well, that was too hard. One word. What about, more words? Well, how many words? 2 words, 3 words, 5 words. There's sentence word games. There's lots of different games in improv. The idea is that you accept the reality of what you're given. In improv, you have boundaries, but they're flexible boundaries, and you can play with them. Once you make the agreement to play, notice how with a partner, there's empathy, there's connection. We're listening very closely to each other. I'm not in my own head. Some people are, and I have been. Sometimes, where do I think the story's going to go? What's he going to say? And if that doesn't come up, I have to be prepared to immediately drop that and respond to the word you gave. Part of the synchronicity is a feeling of connection, that you and I are building something together that's never been done before. And there's a camaraderie and empathy and a share. So when I do team building programs or team strengthening programs, we have this discussion. And this is usually the first game I use. It's very simple. And I would say, related to your previous question, this is how speakers practice. Play with your friends, play with your spouse, play with your kids. Learn to be comfortable with not knowing the outcome. Learn to accept what you're given. It becomes easier. It really changes your neural pathways. I'm sure there's a lot of research in improv and neural flexibility these days, which is exciting.
Many people avoid things like this, improv or even speaking. And then they look back, I think sometimes with regret. If I had presented, I would have gotten more exposure, maybe more business if they're a consultant or coach or whatever they might be, or maybe promoted where they didn't get promoted because they weren't communicating as they should. If you could look back 25 years ago, what would you tell yourself about public speaking?
That's an interesting question. What I would tell myself is that the public speaking, I thought, was very much about becoming an authority and having my status raised. And that was my concern. Am I good enough? Am I smart enough? One of the things I learned is that I wasn't a public speaker. I was a professional speaker. And that to be a professional speaker, there are certain things that the profession required. And that was program design. That was being honest and open about my thoughts. That was learning negotiation skills. So what I would change, I would take that idea into my heart much earlier and be much more of a student. I came from stand-up comedy. I came from teaching. So I was used to performing. I didn't realize the professional speaking part had the business aspect of it and the relationship aspect to it. That's very different from teaching and performing. So I would be more of a beginner's mind.
That's great advice. Izzy, if our listeners want to, and I'm sure they do, learn more about you, your services, and the book you wrote a while back, where can they do that?
Easiest way is izzyg.com, IZZYG.com. Everything is there. I'm active on LinkedIn, so I'd like to connect there too. izzyg.com is the place to connect and see what else is available.
Izzy, it's been a pleasure having you here today.
Really has. I loved it.
That's a wrap of another episode of Public Speaking with Peter George. Be sure to rate, review, and subscribe wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. Tune in Monday when you'll hear another episode of Public Speaking with Peter George, and again Thursday for your next episode of Quick Bites, public speaking tips and techniques you can digest in 5 minutes or less. Until next time, remember, when it comes to speaking in public, you've got this.